as our wonderful panelists join me up here on stage. We really have had some great panels today, haven't we? And some great moderators. I'm hoping I can live up to the Simone Sanders Townsend. She was here this morning and she lit us up, and I immediately I feel like I'm a decent moderator, and then I was like, oh my God, I have to follow that. Okay, so this is really fun for me because I know I've known Karen for a little while. I've admired Liz from afar. This is our first time meeting, though, today. And these are two people that when I think of, really, not just some of the best women in the communication space and politics, but the best people in the communication space, period. These two are at the top of the list. And this is a real treat, and I think a gift for all of us today to get to have this conversation. Karen Finney is someone who you may see on CNN as a political commentator. She's an advocate. She's a political strategist. She's a respected television commentator, leading political and communication strategist, and spirited thought leader. And I think that's really true. She's been working at the intersection of politics, media, and cultural change for more than 25 years. Her unique career roles have included top Democratic communication strategist and spokesperson, political commentator for CNN and MSNBC, television and radio show host, inspirational public speaker, business and communications advisor, leader and advocate for social justice and civil rights. Oh, and a White House staffer, that too. She brings this diverse combination of skills and experience to bear in her current work as a political commentator for CNN, host of TV One's Represent Our Voice, columnist and consultant working with nonprofit, for-profit, and political clients. She's on the board of several national organizations that reflect her commitment to empowering women, illuminating tough issues from different perspectives, and supporting the next generation of leaders. She serves on the board of Let America Vote / End Citizens United, Power Rising, and Ultraviolet. She's also co-convener of the Black Women's Leadership Collective. Please give a round of applause to my friend Karen. And to my left, we have Liz Smith, who is a Democratic strategist who has worked at every level of politics for state legislators, for mayors, for governors, for U.S. senators, and for presidents. She's most well known for her work on Pete Buttigieg's, I feel like I say his name and you all are going to clap, so I'm going to just give you the space. Go for it. Get the Pete clapping out. She worked for Mayor Pete / Secretary Pete on his presidential campaign, where her communications strategy was credited with launching his improbable rise. And I think that's really true. And last year, she wrote a great book, Any Given Tuesday, which was a behind-the-scenes look at politics, and it became a New York Times bestseller. Liz came down today from New York, and if you don't mind me saying, she's a brand new mom, too, and we're really excited she's here. Start with a sort of obvious question to the both of you, which when you just heard Ian talk about effective and authentic communication. I know for me, when I was a New Deal leader, I was the House Minority Leader in the main House. We took back the majority shortly after, which was great. But I would always say to my staff, let's just tell the truth. It's easier to keep track of, right? It was like, they would come to me with all the spin, and I would say, can we just say whatever's true, and then I can actually just remember that? And that's what I always think of. But what does authentic and effective communication mean to you? Karen, I'll go to you first, then we'll go to Liz.
Okay. Actually, when Ian was, thank you all. It's great to be here. When Ian was talking, I was actually, and you and I talked about this a little bit, Emily, I was thinking about Stacey Abrams, because I worked on her 2018 gubernatorial race. And I know, that's why I mentioned her. And we had a situation where, as we're going through her opposition research, figuring out all the ways and all the, especially as a Black woman, all the, memes and various narratives we knew were going to come, one of which is women are not good with money, Black people are shifty when it comes to money, that sort of thing. Maybe there have been some financial scandals in Atlanta, but anyway, that sort of play into that. Anyway, and, she's a tax attorney. And one of the things that came up was, and her chief of staff said it to me this way, well, she didn't pay her taxes for 4 years. And I was like, I'm sorry, what happened? She what? And so, they're like, here's the spin we've come up with. And I said, well, hold on. What happened? Just tell me what happened. Well, turns out her parents, who are ministers, lost their home in Katrina. After they lost their home in Katrina, her brother went to jail. When he went to jail, her mother and father had to raise his daughter. Then her father got diagnosed with cancer. And as Stacy says, and I told her, like, keep saying that, you can put off a tax payment, but you can't put off a cancer treatment. So what happened was, particularly, which is a narrative for a lot of black women in particular, she had to take care of the family because nobody else in her family had the resources to help support her family. So that's what happened. And I said, well, that's the story we're gonna say. It's the truth. It's your vulnerability. And by the way, it's the truth for millions of Americans. It's what's happening for a lot of people, particularly in this sandwich generation, right, where you're trying to, and I said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to write an op-ed so that we get to tell this story first, right? So we're going to be authentic, but we're going to tell it on our terms because it's still politics, by the way, right? So we did that, and it was just a game changer. I mean, people would come up to her in airports and just thank her because, again, so many people are dealing with the same thing and felt so much shame about it. And part of what she was able to do in writing about it was to transform shame into a conversation about just the reality of trying to balance life. And frankly, I think it made people see her as more of why she would be a good governor, right? As someone who actually understands because she lived it. And she was bringing her authentic lived experience to the role. So to my mind, when we talk about authentic communication, I think it's really important that we're always thinking about how do we bring our authentic self to the role in all of our roles, in all of the parts of our lives, because those lived experiences are the reason you are in elected office, that you've won the races that you've won, and hopefully why you will win going forward if you're able to stay in that authenticity.
Thank you, Karen. That is exactly right. And I agree. Liz, I wanted to get your take on this too, because you, again, working with some people at different levels, what does it mean to you, effective and authentic?
Yeah, so, I mean, authenticity is a word that we throw around a lot in politics, go out there, be authentic. And I remember one time I was doing media prep with a governor at the time, and he was like, well, what the hell does that mean? It is worth actually discussing what does that mean. And to me, what it means is knowing who you are, knowing what you believe, and being comfortable in your own skin. Because voters, with all their flaws, I do believe that one thing they can do is they can sniff out a phony. They can tell when someone isn't comfortable in their own skin. They can tell when someone is just parroting talking points that have been fed to them by a political consultant like me or like Karen. A great example of someone who I think was able to be his authentic self, lean into his strengths, perceived weaknesses, and really integrate that with his message and do it really effectively was Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And, when he was running for president, when he started running for president, people were like, oh my God, who's going to go out and vote for a 37-year-old openly gay mayor of a town of 100,000 who's never spent time in D.C., a veteran of post 9/11 war, just had a very, very different bio from what you're used to. But he actually leaned into all of those things that other people might have said made him different or made him unelectable, and use them as proof points, because he was running as someone who would offer something completely different from what was going on in Washington at the time. Someone who could sort of turn the page on the old generational warfare, the endless partisanship, and bring a new, fresh perspective. And you can't really get anything any more different from what was going on in Washington than someone with Pete's bio. But in terms of effectiveness, I really do think, and we'll get more to this, I don't want to drag this out too much, is like what I consider effective communications in political communications is when you're able to cut through the noise, when you're able to break out beyond sort of the amen choir on Twitter, in our political circles, and really have quote unquote normal people listening to, repeating the things that you're saying, the people who don't live and breathe politics every day. And we saw, again, I'm going to use Pete as an example here again, which is that and Mike Schmuel, shout out, he was Pete's campaign manager. When we were doing meetings with Pete in 2018, early 2019, sort of bringing him around, introducing him to reporters, media types, political types, a lot of the feedback we got on him was, I like him, smart guy, but is he really going to be able to break through in today's media environment? And of course, as Ian was saying before, like he's now viewed as one of the best communicators, so it's sort of funny thinking about it. But and people were saying, well, he doesn't really have the sizzle, he's not a brawler. You don't really, he doesn't have what it takes in this moment. And there was this view at the time that to sort of succeed and thrive, you had to go on cable news, yell, scream, hyperventilate, and that to beat Trump, you had to beat Trump. And the first time that Pete was given a national platform, a nationally televised platform, was a CNN town hall. And he took off like a rocket ship after it. And why he was able to take off like a rocket ship was because, his gamble turned out, the gamble that he took turned out to be correct, which is that people didn't think you had to beat Trump to beat him. They wanted the antidote to Trump. They wanted the ultimate counter-programming. And what helped him break through was not by yelling and screaming and calling everyone who disagreed with him a racist, homophobe, xenophobe, white supremacist, and like losing his mind. It was by actually speaking in nuanced, thoughtful, respectful ways to people, being willing to go against sort of, what the normal partisan things are that you're supposed to say, and cut through a lot of the noise that we had in Washington. So I do think it's really, really important when you're going out there and communicating to be willing to go against the grain a little bit, and understand that just because everyone else is doing something, you don't need to follow that course. And I think that Pete was a great example in how by going against the grain, you can really succeed and break through.
So that is great. And both of those examples are people I know and have observed and watched. And I think you're talking to a room full of state and local amazing leaders, right, who are trying to cut through. And earlier conversations today about politics, we were talking about how many ways people get their information, right? TikTok and I'm not on TikTok, so I don't really speak it, but I know it's out there. TikTok and internet of Instagram and Facebook and all the things. There's so many channels. And so I think the question I have is, how do you achieve being effective and authentic when there are so many channels and also this pressure, real or imagined, for content creation, right? There's this sort of drive to create content all the time. And I think you're looking at a room, we talked earlier, sort of joked about getting everybody a ring light so they could make more, content on the fly, which is probably a fun idea, but it's all consuming, right? So where's the balance? What's the best tips or tricks you have when it comes to breaking through and dealing with that weight of pressure of content creation? You look like you're ready to go.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. I'm sure we both are.
Yeah.
Karen knows her stuff too. So what I would say is the advice, whenever I first sit down with someone, the advice I give them when they're sort of setting out on their communication strategy is, who are you? I hate this term, sort of cringy, but like, what is your brand? Because it's really important to know, sort of the image that you're going out to portray to people, because you're going to present yourself differently if you're a change maker or a reformer versus if you're a disruptor or an elder statesman, for instance. So it's really important to know sort of how you want to position yourself. Second, it's really important to have clear goals in mind, right? So what is your goal for the next year? What is your goal for the next 3 years? And try to fit everything that you're communicating into something that will get you to that goal. So, maybe your goal is to get elected to higher office. Okay, so set out a plan for that. Maybe your goal is to get legislation passed. Have a plan for that. The third thing that's really important is to know your issues and stick to your issues. In politics, it is very, very easy to get pulled in a million different directions, especially when you're communicating and doing media. And we all know that. You turn on cable news and you see a congressman or a congresswoman on there who's like a deer in headlights commenting on an issue that they have no idea what they're talking about. So find a few issues that are in your strike zone, become a leader on that, become very effective on that, and don't let yourself get pulled into a million different directions. The people who have the most longevity in this business, the people who are able to go the furthest, are the people who have these set issues, speak to them, become experts in them, and become leaders in those fields. And then the last thing I would say is that's really, really, really important in terms of communications is practice, 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 practice. Practice with your staff. Go through every iteration of every question that you could ever get in a media interview. Practice when you're in the shower. Do things like go on smaller media outlets, talk to cable, talk to college publications, talk to podcasts that maybe only 50 people listen to, because you can just get your reps in. And the more you do that, the more you'll be comfortable going to bigger and bigger outlets. And so, again, I just keep having those very clear, defined goals, defined issues in. Those are the things that can really help you go out there, be comfortable in your own skin, and really sort of own the communications piece of your portfolio.
Karen, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I agree with everything, not surprisingly. I am also someone, I hate talking points. So like when people give me talking points, I'm like, okay, but really what are we trying to say? And then I figure out how am I going to say that in words that I use and the way I talk. And that also goes to brand, which is, it's okay if an advisor, I'll probably get myself in trouble, but I'll just say it, says, hey, we should go out and say X, and you say, you know what, that's a great point, but I can't say that. That's not for me. That's not my message. That's okay. And then maybe you figure out, but here's what I can say. Here's what would be comfortable for me, or here's what makes sense for what my background is, or I've got this story that relates. So I think that's a really important point. And the other one about not being drawn into commenting on something, I'm sure you guys talk about this in your media training, but I'll just say it. It's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. We think again, there's a little bit of vulnerability that peeks through, but it's actually okay to say you don't know. And frankly, that's better than making up new policy on the spot. As my former boss, Howard Dean, used to do when he was governor. I worked with him at the DNC, not on his campaign, but that's a whole other story. But
you might get into those stories at some point. Who knows?
Yeah. But actually working with him was a great way to learn that, right, was because he never does talking points. So we always were having the conversation about, well, what are you trying to say? And then I would say to him, like, here's what I think you said, but here's what people heard. And having somebody give you that feedback loop is really important. Also to make sure that you're clear in what you're trying to say and what you're trying to communicate. And when you're practicing, that is a part of how, having somebody give you that feedback that says, you know what, I'm not sure that what you think you're trying to get across is actually coming across. I think that's another really important way, sort of feedback loop. The other thing I would say, though, is unfortunately the reality is in this fractured media environment, you have to do all of it, right? Your campaigns have to do all of it. Your team has to figure out how to do all of it. And what that means is also understanding the differences between each of these channels, right? One of the reasons, I'm not saying that I agree with him, he's a liar. Donald Trump is a great communicator, and he uses social media brilliantly, in part because he sort of treats content and his comments more as a production, right? He's constantly thinking about how am I disrupting the narrative. And he's very authentic in what he says in every channel. But so it's important, what you do on, I don't even know if Snapchat's still a thing. I think it is. Snapchat, maybe. I don't know.
I'm seeing some.
Yeah, it is. Okay. But, TikTok, what you would say and do on TikTok is different than Instagram, different than X, formerly known as Twitter, because I refuse to just say X, is different than Facebook, is different than if you do a radio interview, is different than when you do a television interview. So the other thing I would just add is part of the way you break through is both being clear who you are, what you're trying to say, but understand the medium that you're communicating in and what's going to break through. So a particular message, you might create a short video that goes out on TikTok, I know some people don't do it, or even like Instagram Reels, that content and those images might be different than how you said it if you were in a radio interview. So understanding what's going to break through in each medium, because they're all very different in terms of what catches people's attention.
All right, quick question. Is there such a thing as bad content now when it's all about being out there?
Yeah.
I would hope so. I was hoping
yeah.
I was hoping the answer was yes. I just wanted to ask it.
And the other thing to be mindful of is that because of, with our phones, every single person you encounter is a content creator. So that means, and this is one of the reasons why I think being your authentic self everywhere you are is, like you said, the truth is easier to remember, right? It's also easier because there really is no off the record anymore. There really is no, think about how many times something has leaked out from a fundraiser. A basket of deplorables comes to mind, right? Where the person thought it was closed. That doesn't exist really anymore. And so, yes, there is such a thing as bad, or the other way to say it is unhelpful, right? And to my mind, it's the worst is when it is something. I've got two ways, right? One is it's something that challenges what people think about you in a negative way. Right? Like, I thought she was really straightforward and honest, but that comment doesn't jibe with that. Or if it's something that reinforces a negative. Like, I'll give you an example. With Ron DeSantis, this whole thing about his boots, cowboy boots. Why does that resonate? Well, in part because it's so petty. And we think of him as being so petty, and it just plays into something we already believe about him that is a negative.
Okay, so before we name drop too many other people, I do want to ask you both, but I'm going to say you're not allowed to use Stacey Abrams or Pete Buttigieg, and you're not allowed to use Donald Trump. I want you to tell me who the best and worst communicators are out there. Okay, let's call it best and in need of improvement. Who could do better? We don't want to, because everyone can grow, right? Not everyone has worked with Karen or Liz or Ian yet, so we're going to give them the opportunity to grow. So who's doing it best, and who would you really like to give some training to, or see them get some training to do it better?
So one person that I find to be really interesting and who has really, I think, broken through in the way that I sort of talked about before is Jeff Jackson. I think he's a New Dealer.
New Deal leader?
Yeah,
yes.
New Deal leader. And he is someone who has really mastered TikTok, mastered Substack, and really broken through. I think he's got like 2.5 million followers on TikTok. Now, if you go to his TikTok, he's not on there co-opting youth memes, doing the latest dances, trying to pander to what you typically think of as a TikTok audience. What he's doing is going on there, being very straightforward, not being super yelly, screamy, as I said before, not being super partisan, but being very nuanced, very low-key, very honest, just doing direct-to-camera explainers of what's going on in Congress. And you know what? It seems so radically different because he's not trying to posture and trying to seem cool for the kids. He's not out there trying to be overly partisan and get people's heart rates up and say something that he will drive tons of low-dollar donations. He's just going out there and trying to demystify this very confusing, Congress for people. How does a speaker get elected? What happened at the UFO hearings? Things like that. And he does say, for instance, going back to what Karen was saying when he was talking about the UFO hearings, he freely admitted, I don't know what the truth is, but I do think that this is an interesting thing for us to look into. And I do think that a lot of people, when they were thinking, who is a politician that's going to break through on TikTok, they weren't thinking it was going to be Jeff Jackson. And it just goes to show you that sometimes if you do treat voters like adults, if you do treat them like people who are capable of absorbing nuance and information in straightforward ways, you can really thrive. So I think he's a really interesting person. I really encourage all of you to go check out his TikTok and to check out his Substack. Another thing he's really good at is he doesn't use legislative speak and politicians speak, and it really helps his message break through. In terms of someone who is not doing things well, I would say Vivek Ramaswamy. So, like, it drove...
Really? I'm shocked to hear you. Just kidding. I'm not shocked.
It drove me nuts. The number of reporters who called me this cycle saying, oh my God, Vivek is the new Mayor Pete. You know, this young Harvard-educated guy coming out of nowhere, going everywhere, going on every media outlet, willing to talk to everyone. And, like, I knew that he wasn't the next Mayor Pete, but I think the one thing that we've learned from Vivek is that not everyone can go out and do what Pete did, of going everywhere, talking to everyone, because the tactics themselves aren't what matters. It's the messenger who matters. And if you were just going on these shows to get on these shows, spew political talking points, say the most outrageous things that will get clicks with no sort of coherence behind them, you're not going to go very far. And what ultimately caught up to Vivek after sort of the initial sugar high was that then people were like, wait, on this show you said we need to zero out aid to Israel, but then in this debate you said Israel will have no stauncher ally than you. In this podcast you said 9/11 was an inside job, and this one, you completely you completely distance yourself from that. And like, if you don't have coherence, if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a clear issue platform, if you're just viewing each of these things as an ability to get a rise out of people, you're not going to succeed. And why Pete was able to succeed was because he knew who he was. He had a message. It was a message that tapped into the zeitgeist of, where a lot of people in the Democratic Party were that day, and it was able to resonate. But it just goes to show that, tactics can only get you so far. The authenticity of the messenger really does matter.
Karen, how about you? Who's on your best and need improvement list?
Well, I'm going to use Liz's word interesting.
Okay.
I think that's
a
safer
It's a good euphemism.
way to frame it. Actually, I think John Fetterman is really interesting and really good.
He is.
He has really figured out how to, hoodie and all, how to remain his authentic self. I had a long story brain tumor. My left vocal cord is paralyzed. So I also identify with him around his vulnerability and honesty, just around what happened to him. And the fact that he's been willing to talk about the ways in which he has to accommodate that and accommodate the fact that he's, and I will never forget was on CNN the night of the debate, and when he was really struggling. And of course, two other brilliant white guys who were on with me said, oh, he's finished. He's done. No way. And I said, no, people, first of all, they already knew him, right? He was an established brand. So they liked him, and they knew. That's a really important thing too, by the way, when you're establishing yourself early and often and stay consistent, because then if something happens, people say, well, we know this guy. We know this person. We still believe in him. And that's what we saw happen. And he has continued to do that and be honest about his journey. He was so honest about depression and honest about, that is such an anathema to politics. And I just really respect it. And I've had the honor of talking to him about it a little bit. And I just, it is so hard to do that and to stay in that vulnerability, especially on Capitol Hill, where he's admitted, people make fun of him, that he needs, an extra minute sometimes to have the comprehension and then speak. So I just think he's a great example of someone who has just figured out, okay, how do I make this work for who I am now and for me in this moment?
And he's figured it out in the public eye,
yes,
which is not something most people who have that kind of challenge have to do. They get an opportunity to go and be private. He didn't have that.
No.
It's been up front the whole time. That's a really interesting example. I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned him before, Karen, about Ron DeSantis, because if you're going to talk about somebody who maybe could use some improvement, I think we've all seen the Ron DeSantis sort of memes about his awkward smile and stuff like that. Is that also sort of an example of just not authentic?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he looks like he is in so much pain when he's trying to smile. Even when he's like talking about his kids or his wife, which you would think these are things that you should be happy, right? This should be easy. But I just don't think that, I don't know the guy, so I can't say. But no, it does not feel authentic to him. What feels authentic is when he is name calling and brash and just being a jerk. That feels authentic. And it's a good, but look, it's real.
I see some Florida people nodding their heads. I think they are like, yes.
I mean, that's who that was his brand. And you know, it was a great example of where I don't think he realized that brand was not going to sell outside of Florida, right? And tell me if I'm mistaken, but my understanding is that's actually not how he ran for governor, as this guy. He kind of became this guy a little bit. But really didn't understand why people would think that banning books was not a good idea, right? Or that, you know, slavery, there were things that Black people learned. I mean, and you can see on his face, he just does not get it. Yeah. And that's the other thing I would just add to this conversation is know who you're talking to. Who are you trying to talk to, right? Because an interview that you're doing is never about the person who's right there in front of you. It's about who's going to watch this, who's going to read this, who's going to hear this. And so being conscious, that doesn't mean you change who you are, but be conscientious about who you're trying to actually reach and talk to. Just quickly, I would say, I think Nikki Haley, I don't agree with her, is another example of someone who's actually done a good job. Yeah, and one of the things I find most fascinating and will be curious to watch is, you know, so many, having gone up against Trump in 2016, so many people have said, oh, you got to take him on and be tough and all this. Personally, I don't think that really works in general because you can't out-Trump, quite frankly. But it's been interesting to watch Nikki Haley take a different approach, and it's more in line with women leaders, right? She's talked about listening to the people and where the people are at, and we've got to, we got to hear where the people are. We got to, be honest where the votes are. So it'll be interesting to see if that strategy actually ends up, not the Vivek, which obviously he's tanking, ends up being the real way around it. I would love to see a woman actually be the one to,
be an amazing moment. That was not an endorsement of any kind for any Republican candidates in this room. So I'm looking around to see if any of you have questions. Oh, I see some hands going up. Okay. First hand I saw, right there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks.
Say who you are, where you're from.
Hi, Rebecca Perkins-Quokka. I'm a state senator from New Hampshire. So just on the line of sort of like authenticity and content, one of the things I struggle with is like, in my true authentic self, I'm a real nerd, right? So I like to talk about like the nuance of a housing program, but the content that gets sort of the reactions are a picture of me with my daughter when I did her hair in a braid, and that's also me. So what I'm trying to figure out is how to blend what we said this morning about touting Democratic wins and talking about the successes of this administration when, like, my voters kind of just want to, like, see me being a person. And I guess I was just wondering if you guys could comment on, like, what is our authentic self, and are we being elected, to be us or to do housing policy? Like, sort of like, where do the voters meet us on that?
How many of you can relate to the I'm a nerd, but people like to see me with my dog or my kid? Yeah, I figured this is a room full of these people.
Yeah,
advice. Yeah,
but honestly, like, let your nerd flag fly. Most people have nerdy sides to them, have earnest sides to them. This is something I talk about in my book. When I hate that I just keep coming back to Pete, but he is a really great example of all of this stuff, which was that, yes, he would go out there and could talk about policy, could tell really deep stories about his personal life, his time, serving overseas. But like, a thing that people liked about him was that he was a little nerdy, and it stood out because I think, and again, this is something where Mike and I heard from a lot of, gray hairs in the party, a lot of political consultants, like, does he really have to go out there and speak 7 languages? Or does he have to go out there and talk about how he's passionate about sewer water? And it's like, yeah, he does, because that's authentic to him and that sets him apart. And I think having those moments where he could sort of nerd out and, speak in Norwegian in an interview, or do a deep dive on, sewer systems in South Bend, it showed people that, one, that he was really intellectually curious, that he was someone who'd had, spent a lot of time thinking about the rest of the world, something that was a really, really big contrast with our commander-in-chief at the time. And two, that he was someone who really cared about all of these issues, both big and small. He wasn't just going out there and, again, talking about policy because he was told, okay, these are the top issues for people. It showed when he could nerd out on more obscure issues, issues that are obscure maybe to us or to most voters, that he was someone who had thought about things, both big and small. And I don't think that voters are looking for politicians to always be the coolest person in the room, to always, be the strong man. I think being able to show off your nerdy side, your personal side, your vulnerable side is really, really important with voters.
Yeah.
Let's get another question in there, if that's okay. Yeah, over here. Or wait, who you got? You got somebody over there? Go ahead. Yep. Sorry, we're going to do as many as we can.
Hi, Erica Strasburger, Pittsburgh City Council. Thank you all so much. It's been helpful. Karen, you had mentioned Nikki Haley. I wonder if you could zoom out and expand on female elected officials. And we know that oftentimes female elected officials are held to a different standard in their public communication. So any others you think do particularly well, or just general observations on what can distinguish a strong female elected official public speaker?
Sure. Well, there's lots of excellent research on this. Emily's list, where Emily's from, has a lot of great stuff. The Barbara Lee Family Foundation has done 20 years of longitudinal data looking at women's leadership specifically, everything from what you wear and how you should talk and how to make direct eye contact, to the fact that, for a woman, when her negatives go up, it's much harder to get them back down. Men go up and they come right back down. But, so there's a lot of good research. I would just say, Nikki obviously had experience in it because she ran for governor. She ran for governor of South Carolina as a brown woman, right? So she figured out how to talk to conservative voters about some pretty tough issues, right? And how to do her politics around that. I think for women, though, in general, again, it's be authentic, right? People are gonna, women get questions, even if people don't say it, they're thinking, well, who's taking care of your children while you're here? Right? And you want to have I have a great family, I have a supportive family, whatever. Like, we're going to get more of those kinds of questions, more attacks on your hair, your clothes. I used to, people sometimes, if I don't have earrings on TV, I'll see something on Twitter about that, which is like, who cares, right? So yes, we are held to a completely different standard. We also have all of the standards of not being hysterical and wanting to make sure you sound like you know what you're talking about, and how to be authentic, but also how to be knowledgeable. One person I work with used to always want to cite the bill number as a way to say, and I was like, why do you want to do that? She said, well, I want people to know I know what I'm talking about. I was like, but nobody knows what you're talking about. You have to, nobody knows what SB 2122 is. You have to say, what's the thing? Say what it did, right? Say what it did for people. So, the one positive I will say, I know I'm jumping around because there's just a lot about women, but there are one of the things that I think is really positive, and Jeff Jackson actually did this, because I worked for Sherry Beasley. There are certain characteristics of women leaders that actually are a plus, right? One, being in a legislative body, because people see women as more collaborative and better at getting people around a table and trying to, figure out an answer. They also think women leaders are better at listening and actually then reflecting back what they heard, because women are good listeners. I'm not saying men aren't, but women are better. That's all. And Jeff Jackson, actually, when he was running for the Senate race, he started out with a listening tour, and his whole thing was that I'm out there listening to people. So part of it is also understanding what are the positive traits that you can lean into, like if you're a woman, particularly a woman of color. Voters don't see you as someone who is probably in the back room with the guys, smoking the cigars and drinking bourbon, right? We're already seen as a little bit of an outsider. Lean into that, right? So lean into the things that are positives about the perceptions that people bring to the table about you as a female leader. But also, and again, figure out how to use your lived experience as a plus, as a way to connect connect to people, as a way to, I'm a big believer in storytelling, right, as a way to connect. So if you're talking housing policy, maybe don't start with the policy, start with a story about someone that tells the story of the policy. I think women tend to be good at that as well.
Awesome. I know we have lots of people who want to ask questions. Like over here was next. And how many minutes do I have? I have 5. Great. So we'll try to do a couple questions.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'll do it fast. Thanks, everyone. I'm Laura Capps. I'm a county supervisor in California, and maybe some of you could have this experience. Most people don't know what I do, and so they just talk to me about government in general. And so I've gotten really used to, I think the worst answer is, oh, I don't do that. That's city, or, oh, that's state, or I just answer the question, right? If it's something about Newsom or Biden, whatever. But that's worked up until now, because now I'm getting a lot of questions about Middle East, and I'm not asking to sort of dive into that, trust me, but I'm just wondering how to sort of like dip out or talk around it, because I'm really struggling. I've been protested. I'm really struggling with this one, because I mean, last time I checked, our county doesn't have a State Department. I have literally nothing to do with it, but I'm getting asked about it everywhere I go.
So a couple of thoughts on that, because a lot of organizations are also, who don't do international policy, are also seeing this, both with the people who work in their organization and because it's an issue in the community. So to my mind, I think there's 2 parts, right? Obviously, you're not going to speak on foreign policy. It's good to see you. We worked together in the Clinton administration. So obviously, you can't speak to foreign policy, but I think what you can do is speak to what's real and what's going on with people in that you serve, right? And speaking to that instead of, I mean, obviously you can refer them to where to find the policy or see what's going on. I think it's probably what you're getting, because we're seeing this in a lot of places, is just more people's angst about what is and the pain about what is happening. And so that's one where I feel like you've got to decide where you want to be on that and how you want to speak to that, and because I think that's probably more authentic.
Do you want to add on that? Are you?
No, we can go.
Okay. Let's,
I agree with what
over
Karen
here.
said.
Yep. Great. And then we'll go over there.
Hi, I'm Kristen McCarthy-Vahey. I'm a state rep from Fairfield, Connecticut, and I'm so thrilled to see this power trio up there. Nerds are cool, and I really appreciate the last question, because this is real in our communities at every level of government. My question is about misinformation. We talked about it earlier today, and especially on social media platforms versus in person or on the radio or when it's a human-to-human interaction. At what point do you give folks advice to disengage versus engaging? Because more and more, especially with AI, we are going to need to make sure, and I know we keep using Pete, and he is a great example of being able to effectively push back, but there's a line as to when you, kind of like the toddler temper tantrums, just extinguish the behavior versus engaging and asking for help with getting that counter message out.
Yeah, look, I think it's really important with misinformation to really, I err on the side of pushing back and being more aggressive rather than less, because you never know what is going to take root. And so if you do see a false narrative getting out there about you on social media or in the media, or, you know, if your canvassers are at the doors, I think it's really important to try to correct the record while you can, because the longer things live out there, whether it's on social media or in the press, the more people can sort of pull them and refer back to them and use them as citations. And it's really, really unfortunate, but I think it's the nature of modern communications that if you don't, cut something off, like, before it takes root, it's really hard years later to go back and correct the record. And it does mean sometimes that you are, punching down a little bit. You're wasting your time on things you otherwise would not like to do. But we have seen, examples of, misinformation like that coming back and really just coming back to haunt people.
The only thing I would add to that is it doesn't necessarily have to be in your voice. You can have it in somebody else's voice, so that when you have to punch down, it's not you punching down, it's somebody else punching down. But also, research in the last couple of years has really shown it's okay and actually important, particularly for women, to call out what it is, right? And the source of it, right? We know what this is. This is, right-wing or funded, whatever the answer is. It's okay to do that too. So to have the not true, but then to kind of say, come on, we've seen this before, guys. We know what this is. Also is effective, particularly for the people who want to support you and want to know, well, what do we do? What do we say?
I'm going to ask you both to think about it, what advice you have for this group, but I think we have time for one other question maybe before we do that. If not, over here. Here we go. Last question before I go to the final advice.
Okay, thank you. This on. I'm Stephanie Pitcher. I'm a senator in Utah. And one thing that I noticed as I think about social media is I feel like I sort of have two tracks with social media. One is engaging with my constituents and getting reelected, but then the other is also, I know that my legislative colleagues see my social media, and I feel like maybe in my state, if you're too active in social media, it's sort of perceived as showy in a way that isn't helpful when you're engaging with your colleagues. And I do think there's probably a gender divide. I think women are seen as more showy than men that behave the same way on social media. But nonetheless, the gender dynamics aside, I'm just wondering if you've worked with candidates who have to balance these two dynamics. And I'll add that I am a Democrat in a very Republican state. And so if I'm too left on social media, that's going to play well with my constituents because I live in Salt Lake City and it's about 70% Democrat. But it doesn't help me at all when I work with my Republican colleagues. And so I'm just curious if you've worked with other candidates that have these challenges and how you deal with that.
Yeah, I absolutely have. Last election cycle, I did a lot of work with Mallory McMorrow, a New Dealer in Michigan. And she was someone who went viral. She gave this amazingly forceful speech, fighting back against a colleague who called her, a groomer, accused her of sexualizing children, all just because she'd stood up to the, anti-trans attacks in her state. And, immediately she got all of this national attention, got this big social media following. And I do think there were some eye rolls among some of her colleagues, oh, she's always on cable news. Oh, she's always on social media. Is she an attention hog? And what was helpful, sure, that stuff is always going to be out there, no matter what. But for her, I think how she was able to sort of combat those sorts of feelings about her was to show that when she was going on social media, when she was going on cable news, when she was doing these things, it was for the bigger goal of helping Democrats flip the state Senate. This wasn't just about getting money into her PAC. This was about, okay, we all believe that in Michigan we want to codify Roe. We want to fight back against election deniers. We want to fight back against the people who are demonizing, trans kids. Me going on cable news, me having stuff that goes viral on social media, me being able to raise money into a PAC that helps every candidate running for state Senate is not about me. This is not about my celebrity. This is something that helps the greater cause. And I think that the more that you can bring it back to the bigger goals that you have for yourself, the bigger goals that Democrats in your area, your state have, the more likely, the less likely people are to roll their eyes. It's always going to be a dynamic. Let's be real. Politics is full of a lot of catty, envious, jealous people, right? And we are competitive by nature, and that comes with the territory. But I do think that if you can find a way to channel sort of your strengths and your ability to break through on those platforms for a greater good, that can help sort of reduce some of the chattering against you.
I completely agree with everything.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap up now. And so this is a group of maybe slightly nerdy, very smart and hardworking, consensus-building, pragmatic, just plain awesome humans that are helping to run state and local government across our country. We need them all to not only win elections, of course, but we really need them to be able to get good things done and take these ideas they have and move them to action. So I want to ask each of you, if you want them all to take things away from today's conversation, what is your best advice? What is your best approach or tip you can offer to this group of all-stars?
So I think we've shared a lot of our best thoughts and advice, and I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, which is self-care. Because and I hope you've talked about it, if not, I'm just going to do it. It is so hard to be doing what you're doing. You know that. And it's going to just keep getting harder because of social media, because we're a very divided country, because people people kind of suck sometimes. Like, they're mean. People can be really mean, and it's hard. And it's hard to constantly have to absorb that. And I don't think we think about it in that way, that when this is coming at you, even when you're doing something that you want to be doing, fighting for something you care about, it's still a fight. It's still energy that you're putting out. So my advice would be to be very real with yourself about what you need, whether that is to prepare for a meeting, for an interview, what's your process? We all have one. And what do you need to recharge, and to really work with your staffs to make sure that that is in your schedule and that you are protecting that time. Because if you don't do that, then you can't go out and do the fights and pass the great legislation and continue to win office. That would be my advice, is prioritize self-care in addition to everything else.
I love it. And what about you, Liz?
There's self-care. There's not a lot of that in politics, right? Especially on campaigns. I would say be willing to go out there and take some risks. Be willing to go out there and fail, right? And it's only through doing those sorts of things that, one, you can really figure out who you are, what works for you, what works for the people you represent, what really resonates. And it's only by doing those things that you really have the opportunity to break through. And, I mentioned Pete before. I just mentioned Mallory McMorrow, but she went out and she gave this, really heartfelt, really gutsy speech on the floor of the Michigan State Senate. And, overnight, it helped make her just sort of this voice against hate, but also this national voice for the importance of state legislatures. And if she hadn't been willing to take that risk, if she hadn't been able to put herself out there like that, we wouldn't have had this, amazing advocate for state legislatures on the national level. And she wouldn't have been able to go out there and raise, $2.5 million to flip the Michigan State Senate and really highlight, the importance of state legislatures, and the local level in bringing about change in so many important issues. So I think, this is really tough. It's really hard to put yourself out there sometimes, but being willing to go out there, take those risks, be willing to fail is ultimately how you'll be able to meet your goals and get to the next level, whatever that is for you.
Great advice. Take risks and take care of yourself. Let's give a round of applause for our incredible panelists. Thank you both so much. This was just awesome. Thank you.